I've had an epiphany today. This week is about Epiphany. If we look at the historical context of the Maccabean revolt, the revolt in which the text we read today was constructed, the first reading, we see Epiphany underlying what's going on. Before going into that, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the epiphany I had this week. The epiphany I had this week, amongst what's going on in our world, is that anti-Semitism is on the rise. That anti-Semitism is back in full force. If we think of the figure who brings this to mind right now, it's formerly known as Kanye, but Ye now. He has been speaking very profoundly, or not profoundly, but profusely, over and over and over again about his anti-Semitic beliefs. And Antiochus Epiphanes was the leader of the Greco-Roman, or really at this time, mostly just the Hellenistic, the Greco Empire, that was ruling Israel when this Maccabean revolt took place. The Maccabean revolt is the historical context for our first reading from the book of Maccabees. Our first reading today, which is from that book. You see, Antiochus Epiphanes, epiphany, if we think of that word, where it really comes from, what it means, I led with, I've had an epiphany, right? Something that comes to me, that appears to me. In the Hellenistic cult or religion, Epiphany was a specific moment when the icon of whatever god you were worshiping in that service was brought out. That was the epiphany, the moment of epiphany. And so what Antiochus was claiming when he said, I am the Epiphanes, is what? I am God. I am God on earth. The epiphany come to earth. Even those in the Greek, the Hellenistic Empire, did not like this man. There's a play on words where a word that rhymes, and I'm forgetting the word, but a word that rhymes with epiphany in the Greek language was used, which actually made him Antiochus the Mad, as opposed to Antiochus Epiphanes. Even they didn't like his rule. Even they found it to be problematic. And during his reign, he instituted an Epiphanies in the temple. An Epiphanies in the temple. What does that mean? Well, it means a desecration of the temple where he had statues of himself and other gods placed into the Jewish temple. And what that means to us, I mean, even if we just think about doing that, having another religion's gods placed in our holy church space, that would be entirely desecrating. But think about that 10 times the magnitude, because in this early Judaism, in First and Second Temple Judaism, this is Second Temple Judaism we're talking about. In Second Temple Judaism, the temple is the literal house of God. The literal space that God inhabits, which was then desecrated. Right? So the placement of a god into that space is the desecration of that space. Now, what does this have to do with resurrection, with today? Well, I think it's very related. You see, the early Christians, they missed the point, like we often miss the point. I think anti-Semitism, in all of its evilness, is also missing the point. It's missing the point. Who did the belief in the resurrection come from? Well, this text tells us not actually Jesus himself, but of a pervasive, a permeating belief in Hebrew society that had formed up. The Maccabean revolt happened before Jesus was born, to the tune of anywhere between 135 and 150 years before his birth, depending on what year you place his birth. Actually at 0 or sometime after, or even before. But this revolt happens, and we get texts like this, where we have the story of a man saying, I am okay to die because I will come back in the resurrection. I will come back in the resurrection. So that means that the belief in the resurrection permeated Hebrew thought. Not all of Hebrew thought, because as we see in the gospel reading, there are Sadducees who disagree with that. But I think as Catholic Christians, we can identify that you can be a part of the same group and have others that disagree with you, right? So there were disagreements, and the Sadducees held their own belief, which was that there was no resurrection, that didn't make sense. But again, they were missing the point. Much like Christians in the 4th century who began persecuting quite heavily by that point Jewish people, even though they had come from the Jewish religion, they were missing the point, because as Jesus says, the kingdom of God doesn't operate on these sort of issues that you're trying to bring before me. That there is more to it, right? That there is something greater going on that you're missing. In the 3rd and 2nd centuries, we see Christians writing about, they're making all of these sort of, I guess you'd call them dossiers, on how when we get resurrected, our lungs will work just like this, and our heart will work just like that. That's missing the point. We often miss the point. And when does it come that we actually see the point? When do we actually see the message before us? Well, I think it's on days like today, on days where we remember our loved ones. You see, Jesus is not telling us, hey, I'm going to resurrect the heart like this, and we're going to put the valve together just like that. No, Jesus is saying, in the mercy of God, we will all be brought together and back with those that have gone before us. Those of us who will go before the day of resurrection, that we will find peace, that we will find love and mercy again together. And that is finding the point. And so as we find the point, I charge you to ask yourself, what are ways you are complicit in missing the point, especially as it relates to anti-Semitism? Most Christians, I would charge, through implicit statements or, sadly, explicit ones, are guilty of some form of anti-Semitism in our life. You see, it's an implicit anti-Semitism when we say that Jesus is the only way to be the expression of Judaism, the truest expression of Judaism. He's the expression of Christianity. He was a Jewish man, and he was Jewish in his thought, and he never identified himself as Christians. But that does not give us right today to insert ourselves onto Jewish people and to say that we know the fullness of your truth. And so I would charge you to have and exercise the humility that doesn't miss the point, the humility that sees we are all from a common heritage, but one that has diverted. One that has diverted and made us unique, and that's okay, and kept them unique, and that's okay. Because if we don't stay on point, and if we continue to miss the point, we will miss epiphanies about changing political dynamics that have very real implications for people today. The rise in Christian nationalism is fearful, is a source of fear for me, especially for our Jewish brothers and sisters, whom during times of extreme Christian fervor often find themselves persecuted, who during times of extreme identity, extreme identity marginalization, they find themselves persecuted. You see, Antiochus Epiphanes was spreading the gospel, as it were, of Hellenistic culture. That's why he did what he did. It was the dominant culture. And just like the Hellenistic folks had and continue in that period to have and to reconcile what it meant to not honor the ability to, or the responsibility of being the majority culture, we now have the responsibility of being the majority religion in this country. And what that means is not Christian nationalism that persecutes. What it means is Christian epiphany that welcomes and honors our common heritage without forcing assimilation.